Tonight, I want to share with you the story of a man who had exhausted his body and his spirit, yet had absolutely nothing to show for it. He was a man who had worked grueling physical labor his entire life. He woke up before the sun every single day, pushed his body to its absolute limits, and convinced himself that this exhaustion was simply the necessary price of survival. He worked 10 to 12 hours a day, trading his physical energy for a paycheck that barely covered the stack of bills waiting on his table. His debts were piling up. His body was constantly aching, and his situation seemed entirely hopeless. He had reached that dark point where effort no longer brought him closer to relief, but only made him violently aware of how far he felt from security. He came to me completely drained. He had heard me speak of the power of imagination, and in his desperation, he determined to put it to the test. But he confessed that by the time he laid his head on his pillow at night, he was simply too exhausted to construct elaborate mental scenes. The thought of forcing his tired mind to visualize specific faces or count imaginary dollar bills felt like just another heavy job to him. He was entirely burned out. For years, this man believed what so many of you now believe. He believed the physical world was a place of extraction, and that if he surrendered enough of his energy, the world would eventually compensate him with security. But the law of assumption does not reward physical suffering. It only mirrors your dominant state of consciousness. You cannot secretly occupy the mood of an exhausted, struggling laborer and expect the mirror of reality to reflect the life of a financially liberated man. When he first encountered these principles, he made the same mistake many make. He simply exchanged his physical labor for mental labor. Each night, he lay in bed, his body aching from the day, and tried to force his tired mind to construct elaborate scenes of wealth. He attempted to count money, to imagine specific conversations, to generate a feeling he did not naturally possess. But the harder he tried to hold the image, the more it slipped away. The moment his focus broke, anxiety rushed in, telling him he was doing it incorrectly, that his failure to visualize perfectly meant nothing would ever change. He had turned the creative act of imagination into another exhausting shift of labor. He found the entire process agonizing. To hold a complex mental image while mentally and physically depleted is not faith, it is strain. And strain is the opposite of assumption. When you struggle to maintain a picture, you are silently declaring that the desire is not yet real. You are attempting to create it through effort, and you cannot fight for something you already possess. The very tension you feel while constructing the image, the unease when it fades, is a quiet confession of doubt. One evening, this man reached a breaking point where he simply surrendered to his own exhaustion. He lay upon his bed, his muscles completely fatigued from the day's labor, and he refused to imagine a single specific thing. He did not construct a scene of success, he did not picture a new job, and he did not attempt to conjure the feeling of holding money. The desperate need to fix his life had fallen silent. In that stillness, he sought only the profound relief of knowing he would never have to perform back-breaking labor again. He decided to condense that feeling of absolute relief into one short, simple phrase that implied his desire was already a finished fact. As he closed his eyes, he took a deep breath, and as he exhaled, he gently whispered the words, "It is already taken care of." He did not attempt to define who was taking care of it, nor did he attach the phrase to any specific condition involving his debts. He simply allowed the tone of those words to wash over his exhausted body like a lullaby. Slowly, gently, again and again, "It is already taken care of." With each repetition, he felt the tension leaving his body. The tightness in his shoulders began to soften, and the restless energy that once kept him awake was replaced by a deep, comfortable stillness. He was not trying to force the world to listen. He was not trying to persuade himself of something untrue. He was simply resting in the quiet dignity of a man whose burden had already been lifted, because his conscious mind was too tired to argue or analyze. The phrase passed beyond his usual doubts. You do not say it is taken care of when you are hoping for a miracle. You say it when the weight has already been removed. He wrapped himself in that single mood of relief and allowed himself to drift into sleep while anchored in that state of consciousness. He made this simple act his habitual mood each night. For several weeks, the outer world offered no immediate sign of change. He still rose before the sun, he still performed the same labor, and the same bills continued to arrive. But within himself, something had shifted. He no longer felt the anxious urgency of a struggling man. For each night, he entered the feeling of one who was already secure, and in that feeling, he slept. He made this simple practice his habitual mood every night, and though the visible world offered no immediate sign of change, he did not return to the old struggle. He kept the act. Then, one afternoon, the bridge of incidents unfolded in a way his conscious mind could never have devised. A certified letter arrived at his cramped apartment from a legal firm in another state. It concerned a small piece of barren land his late father had left him decades earlier, a property he had long forgotten, for it had been considered entirely worthless. The letter explained that a drilling firm had recently discovered a vast oil deposit beneath that very land. They were not merely offering to purchase the property. They were legally bound to pay him a substantial monthly royalty for the lease. When the final papers were signed, he was guaranteed an income 5 times greater than his current wages, and that payment would arrive each month for the remainder of his life. He would never again need to lift a heavy tool or submit himself to exhausting labor. This man did not succeed because he found a better method of visualization, nor because he exerted greater effort. He succeeded because night after night he abandoned the state of struggle and entered sleep in an entirely different state of consciousness. You believe that if you can change your outer circumstances, you will finally feel at ease, but you have reversed the order. It is not the condition that produces the feeling, it is the feeling that produces the condition. You are attempting to change the outer world while remaining in the inner state that created it. So tonight, do something entirely different. Do not try to solve your life. Do not attempt to force an outcome or construct an image of your bank account. Take one simple phrase, "It is already taken care of," and allow it to carry you into sleep, not as effort, but as release. You will discover that the moment you cease trying to control the outer world is the very moment it begins to move in your favor. Now, let us go into the silence.